So welcome everyone. I see some of you, I don't really recognize whether or not you were present yesterday in the session that we had yesterday. So can you bring some light? I see Margarida, Joao, Olivia, Mateus, Alexandra. Any of you attended yesterday to the workshop that we did? No? Okay. Great, so no problem, because the idea is to, I mean, some of the concept, we're going to be evolving on what we talked about yesterday, but of course, yesterday was really basic. So, Ling, would you like to make an introduction before we get started about the purpose and what brings us here and what is our intent for this workshop? Oh, you're muted. Hold on.
Are we fine?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay, hello, my name is Lin, and since if none of you has been here, then I guess just Diego and I, we reintroduce ourselves. My name is Lin, and I'm the co-founder of also the executive director of the Natural Step. And the Natural Step is a international organization. It's actually a world first sustainability advisory organization. And right now we are present in 18 countries. And we were founded 1989, so it's really long. And our aim is to coach company to embed sustainability into their core business to enable operation improvement and also to drive innovation, also profit. And I would say we have done relatively good job. Since 30 years later, we're still here. But this is one side of the story of today. And the other side of the story is exponentials and exponential acceleration and digitalization as well. And this is relatively new. And Diego will talk about the attributes of exponential organization today. And I will be cover what about if this can be used wrong. So basically, if we want to, we talk about transform innovation all the time. And the way we see it is that it comes from two dimensions. And first, tsunami comes from the unsustainable behavior from company and business practice. And the other tsunami comes from the exponential effect and growth from all the different technology and the convergence of different technology. And within, basically, we're living in a very uncertain world. And within this uncertainty, and how do we actually make ourselves certain? And how do we make sure that we can both be sustainable and also grow in an exponential way? And make sure that we do not grow in the wrong direction. And that is what today is about.
Absolutely. So you'll see that we are very bold here. I mean, we have an experiment to propose to you, which is precisely reconciling two words that we are not certain that at all instances can be overlapped or can retrofit themselves. So that is precisely what we're going to be exploring with you. Let me start a little from the beginning. I'm going to try to cover it in a fast pace, because the topic today is not only exponential, is this combination between exponential and sustainability. So what does exponentiality mean? Well, if we look at this curve on screen that I assume everybody can watch, yes? So if you look at this curve, oh, by the way, if you want to have your cameras on, that's going to create a much better experience for all of us. Of course, we respect your decision, but that's definitely going to broaden the bandwidth of our communication. So you're very welcome to do so if you want. So this is a curve that represents or in this plot we have represented the human innovation, let's put it that way, from the agricultural revolutions to current days, and we see that there is some sort of a jam at the right part of the curve. That is because we see that one technology, one scientific discovery precipitates the next. So we see that once we get to a certain point, things start to change massively at a massive scale. And that scale and that speed is what we describe as exponential, because it's not linear. It's not 1 + 1 + 1. It is exponential, meaning 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, etc. And that is a pace of change that comes actually from the price performance, the doubling price performance of transistors and electrical components that were observed by Gordon Moore in the past. And we see that not only the electrical components and the transistors, but anything that is dependent on that, any activity, any organization that depends on that, also suffers that same pace of change. So we have a lot of new technologies that we could describe as Gutenberg moments converging all simultaneously at once. Every single one of them could create a massive tsunami, to put it this way, of change, disruption probably, and in combination it is just really hard to grasp what the future would look like for companies, for businesses, for organizations, for society in general. Nevertheless, we've observed that there are two types of situations, the worst of times and the best of times simultaneously. We see some companies and organizations that are crashing because they don't know how to handle all of this change at speed. And one example is Congo Gumi, one of these mythical companies that some of us know of. I am an architect. I'm really interested on this company because it's been working for over 14 centuries, building architectural wooden temples. No nails, every detail was solved in wood. And so it's the longest living company ever. And just recently it had to close or to be sold to another company just because they couldn't bear with the speed of change. So in general, we see that the legacy organizations are crashing, and some others are crushing it. I mean, they are doing very well in this moving landscape. They seem to be able to serve the ways of disruption and exponentiality. So Salim Ismail is a professor, and he was an ambassador and a director of Singularity University. And he asked himself this question: why is this happening? Why some crush it while others crash? So he started a review of over 1,000 organizations worldwide, tried to understand whether or not there was some commonality, some attributes that these organizations, that could be observed in these organizations that were being so successfully surfing these waves of disruption, etc., and to what extent we could use them. We could apply them to other companies trying to be relevant in the near future, or just try to exist, or to become the disruptors of an arena or an industry. So he did a research in which I participated, and we looked at a lot of companies, and we did in fact find those little patterns that were observed across these organizations. And that was the beginning of the book, The Exponential Organizations, that was written, I think it's now 7 years ago. It was a massive success, and it still is a number 5 book in business, because it's really celebrated. It opens a new perspective, new frameworks, new tricks and methodologies to a new reality, which is not the need of a digital transformation, but the need of an exponential transformation. Okay, so he also defined the concept of an EXO. An EXO, an exponential organization, is one whose impact is disproportionately large, at least 10 times better than the competence, due to organizational techniques, due to new tricks or new ways to address the purpose and the functioning, the internal functioning of the organization. That is precisely what we're going to put into consideration here. We're going to cover these attributes, and I'm going to give you a brief insight right now. Here on screen you have the 11 attributes. I'll describe a little more thoroughly in a while, but the idea is we're going to go through each one of these attributes, and we're going to ask the question: can these attributes be used in a sustainable way? Do we have any case studies, any examples that might be relevant? And can we use them ourselves for our sustainable ventures? And also we'll be exploring together with Lin some cautionary tales, like these red lines that sustainability is proposing for us not to fall into the negative impact way. So here on screen, you have what we call the EXO attributes. Those are the attributes that we have observed across organizations, across unicorns. Not all of them are observed in all of the organizations, but you'll see that there is, at least the the organizations that we call the unicorns or the exponential organizations, when they're new, they frequently cover a good majority of these attributes, maybe not all of them. And we suggest the existing organizations to try to apply 1, 2, 3, or even 4 of these attributes to try to make a massive dent on their reality. Okay, so how do we understand these attributes? Well, we have 3 kinds of attributes. We have the most important of them all, which is the massive transformative purpose. It is all about purpose. We are acknowledging that now companies are changing the raison d'être, the reason to exist, and it is no longer necessarily about maximizing individual or investors' profit. It's about much more than that, and we are trying to leverage not only the internal capabilities that we have, but also the external capabilities that we have in terms of resources, in terms of investment, in terms of talent. And for that, you need an attractor, a fundamental attractor for all of these resources that you want to leverage. That attractor is what? Well, it's the purpose. What is the intent of the organization? That is what we describe as a massive transformative purpose. And we're going to go through it in a little more depth. But for now, let me jump to these 2 colors, right? On the screen, we see that we have a white describing the scale attributes, and we have a purple describing the ideas attributes. There are 2 kinds of attributes because the function of these attributes is different. On the one side, we have the external attributes that allow our organization to connect to abundances out there, to connect to staff, to connect to algorithms, to connect to resources, etc. And on the right, I'm going to use this one because I believe this one is much clearer. So on the left, we can access abundance. Not only are we limited to the resources, talent, and intelligence that we have within the organization, we can, if we are attractive enough in terms of our purpose, we can connect to a massive amount of external resources. And on the right, we have the attributes that would allow internally the organization to manage these abundances. Because of course, if you connect to an abundance of data, but you have no means to filter through those data and no means to actually activate the insight that you get from those data internally, you're just going to get lost in an abundance of data, right? So if you connect to an abundance, it's like a fire hose. You need to connect to some kind of filter internally that allows you to manage that abundance. So that is the description. That is the reason why we have the left and the right? The scale, that are the acronyms for staff and demand, community, algorithms, leverage, asset, and engagement, and the ideas, which are the internal attributes that describe the interfaces that we need to make sure that everybody's aware of what's going on, the dashboards, that is very much related with the metrics that we use internally, the culture, the systematic experimentation inside the organization, which is one of these fundamental, probably the most important attributes in this context of uncertainty, and then the autonomy and the social attributes. So this is a very brief description of these attributes. We're going to go much deeper into them, and that is precisely the purpose of this session. But just to give you a quick idea, Staff on Demand will give you access to expertise that is not necessarily within the boundaries of your organization. Community can give you momentum. You can now do many more things that you could if you were not connected to an existing community. Algorithms allow you to extract value from the data. Leverage assets give you flexibility. You no longer are attached to the physical assets. You can just rent them, or you can just make pay per use these assets, right? And engagement gives you participation, fundamental attribute that is very much related with the purpose, right? You want purposeful people to be engaged in your organization, and you want to create the feedback mechanisms for those people to remain engaged. On the right, we have ideas. We have the interfaces that is all about connecting the offering and the demand, for example. We have the dashboards that give you clarity, experiments that allow you to make a systematic learning, which probably John Hagel describes that probably is the only sustainable reason for organizations to exist in the future. John Hagel is a thinker from the Deloitte Center for the Edge. He recently left this center, but I think he's very bright, and he talks precisely in terms of sustainability. And he suggests the only reason why people or other organizations would eventually want to collaborate with a third organization is because they will learn faster. So very interesting, these scalable learning versus the scalable efficiency. Then we have the autonomy that gives you ownership, gives people ownership, and the social that in opposition to what it might look, it's not about social networks, it's about the tools that allow us to leverage our collective intelligence and to work more efficiently. Okay, so very quick overview. Some attributes are thought to connect to abundances. Some other attributes are thought to manage abundances. But if our purpose is not good enough, we're not going to be able to unlock any of those abundances. Okay, so this is the formula. We're going to be reviewing it just to give you some context. These formula and these attributes were revisited by some organizations. This is a Hald Business School, and they found correlation between these attributes and the market performance. All right. So now our aim is to find attributes relationships between these attributes and the sustainable metrics, and that is the part that Lin will be covering. I'm going to finish this introduction by saying that now we have completely new challenges, and the methodologies that we had in the past were just not fitted to address these challenges. We are very confident after the experience that we have acquired that this approach is very much helpful, because we've tested it with many companies worldwide to face the challenges of the digital and the exponential transformation. What is uncertain again is, will we be able to use these attributes to face the sustainability challenge that we have in front of us? Okay, so the book represented the ingredients. Then we have a recipe that is the OpenExO methodology that is open to everyone to apply it. And there's a website that you can go take a look at it on OpenExO. And if you need cooks to help you with the recipes in your kitchen, you can connect to the EXO community, which Ling and I belong to try to help you make sense of all of these tools. So we have a lot of tools today. We're going to be looking at the attributes, and what we do typically is try to help companies make sense of these attributes, how these attributes represented here on the what we call the EXO canvas on the left should be populating our business model canvas. The business model canvas is that canvas that represents the reality or the aspirational reality when we plot it of a business. If we do this right, these attributes are going to be foundational to what we are doing. Not like the topping that we put on top of our projects, but something that really is consubstantial to our effort. Okay, and so this is precisely, it's not easy to do, but this is precisely what we try to help companies during what we call a 10-week sprint. As I was saying, and I'm finishing now, we've worked with large industries and companies worldwide, and it's 10-week experiences in general, 12-week sprints that are really, really interesting. They're interesting because you see the effect not only on the company but on people. You really see how people change their mind to what? To a new mindset, which is the abundance mindset. It's not easy to understand this concept of abundance. I'm going to try to elaborate just a little more with a couple of examples, and then we'll jump right to the attributes that are proposed to help us leverage those abundances, okay? But the idea is that the new abundance creates new opportunities, but also new problems. That means that any company designed to be successful in the past is doomed for failure in the present, because the mechanisms, the aims, the challenge, the possibilities, the risk are completely different, right? So we need to acquire a completely different mindset, and well, that is what we try to do with companies. Okay. Am I going too fast? Probably yes. Right. So I'm going to try to slow down a little bit. You see that I'm really passionate about this, but let's see if there's any questions that we can help to clarify. Any questions so far? No? You can use the chat for questions, or you can just voice them. Well, I don't know if you can unmute yourselves. You can voice them or ask them to unmute you, because ideally this would be a conversation, okay? All right. So what is abundance? I mean, we're talking about exponentials, we're talking about abundance, but do we have clarity around those terms? Probably not yet. So that's why I'm going to give you the original example with which I learned about abundance. This is Peter Diamandis on screen. This is the guy that I met, one of the 3 co-founders of Singularity University. Salim was one of them. Ray Kurzweil was another. And this Peter Diamandis is a very famous entrepreneur that wrote a book called Abundance. the main idea behind the book is that with new technologies, what we do besides control and everything, what we do is liberating abundances, liberating resources, liberating assets, liberating material, liberating energy, liberating things that were that were scarce in the past, and now, thanks to the intervention of technology, they become abundant. So this is a book, and you'll see that it's covered with a paper foil here, aluminum foil. And that's the case because it used, well, it was covered, the original version was covered with this aluminum foil. And that's because the main example that he used, or one of the clear examples that he uses, is precisely the aluminum. The aluminum in the past was not abundant. And actually he used the example of how the King of Siam was received by Napoleon III, that's the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. He was received with all honors, and to really express their gratitude, they receive him with a special silverware. Everybody would be eating using a gold silverware or a platinum silverware, but the king was served with aluminum silverware. Why was that? Well, because aluminum was really, really hard to get. It would take a lot of time and a lot of energy and effort to separate the aluminum from the surrounding material. And that was the case until we had a new technology that changed completely that landscape. And that was the technology, what's the name of this again? It slipped my mind. Anybody can help here? I think it's the electrolysis that was able to separate all of the, I believe it's the electrolysis. So thanks to the electrolysis, they were able to separate all of the components from the material that actually is very frequent on the Earth's crust. You can find 8% of the Earth's crust is made out of aluminum, but it was just very, very hard to separate from the rest. So now, thanks to this electrolysis, we had an abundance of aluminum, and we are using aluminum currently here as depicted in these images. We just don't consider this valuable anymore because it's so abundant. So we had a technology that liberated an abundance, and that not only is happening through atoms for physical things and resources, but also to bits. We see now that we have a problem, infinite abundances. So we have abundances of communication. In the past, it was all one-sided communication, and we have now cross-communication. Now we have abundance of computing power. If you look at the curve of computing power, it's just amazing. It goes beyond the Moore's law, how much we are able to compute with what little budget. We have abundance of energy. We look at the prices of energy, and we look at the price of solar energy and the panels, and we see that they are dropping massively. And well, there's probably no reason to believe that those curves will stop dropping. Probably it will become free, a commodity in the near future. We have abundance of intelligence, maybe not artificial intelligence level 5 yet, but there is abundance of intelligence, both digital and human intelligence. Now there is an eclosion of people, and more trained, more educated, more connected people, and now we can leverage the collective, or we can start thinking of leveraging the collective intelligence of all of those people and improve the systems with which we organize ourselves. We have abundance of data, very problematic, and we have abundance of talent, and those are like gross abundances. But the challenge is finding small abundances that we can leverage. That is exactly what we do at OpenExO, and that is what our tools and methodology are conceived for: unlock abundances. So everything seems really good, and everything seems really, amazing, really interesting, and so that. But there's some fundamental changes that need to be observed. If you think about it, when we first have internet, there was one fundamental change that took place. So when you're running a business, you're worried about the cost of the demand and the cost of the supply. So in the past, with internet, we were able to lower massively the cost of the demand. You can access a global market. You can, the cost of acquisition of clients really drop to zero, and almost to zero if you hit the bullseye and you came up with a meme or something that would spread like a virus, and you will see that the marginal cost of the demand was zero. So that was in the past, 20th century internet. And now we see something really relevant happen, which is not only the cost of the demand, but also the cost of the supply is dropping to zero. And that is new. This is completely new. This goes in opposition to what organizations have been doing of collecting and protecting assets and goods and creating a boundary about those scarcities. Now everybody can access the supply too, not only the demand of the supply. And now we see that Uber, the largest the world taxi company, owns no vehicle. Facebook has no content. Alibaba has no inventory. Airbnb has no real estate. There's something here going on. There's something really, really interesting going on. And that's exactly what we want to observe. And for that, one example I'm going to propose you for the rest of the session today is this one. This one is Airbnb. Airbnb leveraged the abundance of empty spaces, the abundance of assets, and they do it very successfully, or at least before the pandemic, right? They've been really, really successful. I don't know if you've ever gone to Airbnb. I've gone quite frequently, actually, and I have never found this very one depicted on the picture, but I guess it's just because my profile is not good enough, because they do profile you. They do profile you. They profile how good you've been in the past as an owner or as a visitor, and or whether or not you are a corporate or individual using the platform. But they do profile you, right? But there's something really interesting regarding the business scheme. As I was saying, they are leveraging assets, and this is Brian Chesky in the past suggesting that Marriott, their competence, wants to add 30,000 rooms in 2015, and we will do that within the next 2 weeks. So this approach of leveraging assets is what allows them to grow at this pace. I mean, it is amazing. You keep a similar price and the cost of demand and supply drop to zero, so your company explodes. That is what's happening. You give a better price, your cost drop to zero, you crush it. Okay, so with this, I hope that we are starting to understand what abundance is as a concept, right? Are we getting there? Alexandra, I only see you, so I keep on looking at your face to see whether or not there is understanding. Yeah, you're saying non-sustainable and not profitable. Okay, great. So that is precisely the kind of conversation that we have. So the question is, what can go wrong regarding using abundances? Lin, jump in, please.
Okay. Diego talked about abundance, and the original idea of EXO world abundance means more or less abundance of data and also abundance of unleveraged assets. However, we also talked about aluminum. That's a wonderful case. That's also one of the very good example of being not unsustainable, because aluminum is something that we actually dig out from the Earth's crust. And by doing it, and if we do not keep it in a loop, in a circular economy point of view, it's actually we increase the concentration, systematically increase the concentration level of the stuff that we dig up from the Earth's crust, which brings unsustainable behavior. And that's from short term, it sounds like that the cost is going down and the marginal cost is close to zero. But long term, the cost will go up because the environment is basically the real planet boundary that we live in. And that's one. And two, we also talked about abundance and eventually what for human being, our ultimate goal, the abundance we are trying to pursue, we're trying to seek, is the abundance of happiness, right? So by having such a cost and price kind of relationship, and what we can see, what it will cost is overconsumption, which really does not necessarily bring happiness. It may make you feel happy for short term, but the reason or the fundamental reason that people feel happy is that your basic needs are met. And all those services or products that we buy and we consume are some sort of satisfiers. And once we feel our needs are met by some satisfiers, then we feel happy. However, something, or quite often, those are not real satisfiers. Sometimes we feel pseudo happy by pseudo satisfiers, and overconsumption can be one of them. And for a very short of time, you bought something, and then you feel really happy. But for a long time, this really make you feel worse. So those can be something going wrong, and we really need to be
And
cautious
Lin,
about it.
so I think it's very clear up front that we can be talking about negative abundances, but also positive abundance, right?
Mhm.
Because can anybody think of an example of a positive abundance? Okay, I'll tell you one really quick.
Abundance of good ideas and great people in the planet.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Great,
Also,
thank you, Patricia.
Surgeries performed from anywhere in the world through the internet, basically.
Right, right, right. So there can be abundance of empathy. There can be abundance of data to, probably solve the COVID pandemic. There can be abundance of goodwill. There can be, very broad abundance or really very specific abundances too. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with the concept of abundance, I would say, as long as that we understand that, right? There's positive and negative abundances. Okay, one example that I believe has been pretty... Sorry, go ahead.
Someone just typed abundance of creativity. Creativity.
Oh, yes.
That's great.
Yeah. So this is Yuval Noah Harari. He gave an example quite interesting. Today, more people die from obesity, that is the abundance of food, than from starvation. So I believe, we already have a concept that can be subject to interpretation. So, and that is the main concept of the exponential organizations. The second main concept is the exponential growth. And we are going to try to review that concept also through the lens of sustainability, okay? But before we do that, I want to really quick talk to you about the attributes. And I'm going to start, actually, probably these would take a good part of our conversation, starting to talk about purpose. Okay, so these are different representations of the EXO canvas that we have. On the left, the aim to connect of abundances, and the most obvious abundance is information on the left. And on the right, we want to manage those abundances to implement the positive impact that we want to see in society. So, and in between, we have the external and the internal attributes, right? This is this little formula, and these are some description of these attributes. We can have them in several languages. If you want, please write to us, and we'll be sending you at least a better part of this presentation, so you can have them at hand. But I want to focus on the most important one, the overarching article, which is the massive transformative purpose. Okay, the why we exist. What is the purpose of our organization, and why would I be able to attract with this purpose to a massive amount of people, efforts, etc. So in the example of Airbnb, Airbnb's MTP is to create a world where you can belong anywhere. So that is the aim of Airbnb, and it's an inclusive aim. Anybody that wants to participate on building that utopia, if you want, is welcome. Precisely that is the purpose of the MTP, create connections between people that share aligned interest, okay, and then hopefully complementary capabilities, right? So that is the first thing. MTP is not a slogan. It doesn't talk about the company or about you as an organization or as an individual. It talks about the kind of future, the kind of utopia that you want to collaborate on building. It is that bold, it is that aspirational, it is that emotional, if you want. If, I can give you many checklists of what a good MTP is, but if it doesn't make you feel, if it doesn't have an emotional reaction on you and the people that hear it, and if it cannot be replicated by any one of you, probably that's not a good MTP. The MTP that I like the most is No Child Left Behind, which is actually not an MTP from a company. I thought it was a infant hospital in US, but it happened to be a US Senate law, No Child Left Behind. That, of course, was replicating the very famous No Man Left Behind used by the Greeks, and then many military traditions until the Marines used it too. No Child Left Behind. That gives you a very clear image sensation of what are the kind of decisions that you need to take if you work in a hospital as a doctor or in the insurance part or anywhere. If I am a doctor and I see a hospital that claims that MTP, no child left behind, I know I want to be working there given the opportunity. And I know what kind of decisions I'll need to take, right? So that is the purpose of the MTP, to give you clarity, to give you a North Star, a new utopia that you can refer to for taking your decisions, etc. So that is the power of an MTP. And I've been talking about MTPs massively, but trust me, when you do find an amazing MTP, it really changes everything. Now I'm working with some companies in Spain trying to, and associations of patients trying to create a new therapeutical solutions for cancer patients. And I propose them the no patient left behind. And it's working, you wouldn't imagine. I mean, really, people are calling out our door to try to collaborate on this effort, because once you have that statement, if it is authentic, it's going to open so many different doors, but it needs to be authentic. It's not a marketing claim. It really needs to represent not only what you as leaders of your organizations or something want to create, but what the community that you're serving really is aiming to. So that is the beauty of an MTP. And it makes special sense now in the context of this transition, right? We are transitioning from hierarchical organizations to networks and communities. And the aggregating factor for these communities is the purpose, right? So we have example, and I'm going to bring you one example of a MTP that I really like, probably a company that is very well known for every one of you, which is Patagonia. Patagonia is an outdoor apparel company that wanted to produce high quality outdoor clothing and technical material. After 4 years of story, I mean, they did become a certified B Corporation that allows them by law to seek not only financial benefits, but also other kind of benefits related to sustainability or related to social impact, etc. And they had been operating under this claim for quite some time. We build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to environmental crisis. And that was until November of 2019, when the now ex-CEO, Yvonne Chouinard, announced that the mission of Patagonia would be, we are in business to save the whole planet. That's it. We are here to save the whole planet. So that brings massive clarity, and hopefully, Lin, this is to begin with completely aligned with the sustainability principles. But I've worked with them as a case study for several times, and we see that, even though it is their main purpose, be carbon neutral, they can go further. They could actually aspire to be carbon negative, or they could try to be at all levels coherent with what they're doing. For example, if you buy a Patagonia shirt, probably you'll receive it wrapped in plastic, okay? So I'm not pointing the finger at all. I'm just saying that the MTP is not enough to really precipitate these mechanisms, these internal mechanisms. So we should remember, we should try to remind ourselves what are the limits of these tools that we are working with, and what might be the ways that this goes wrong. As I told you before, the MTPs that I prefer, other than this one, is not necessarily related to sustainability. I mean, no child left behind. Well, probably in a creative manner we could connect it, but I don't see the obvious connection between sustainability and the MTP. So the question is, can you imagine any context in which an MTP goes wrong? Before you answer, the intent of the MTP is create positive impact. The problem that we have is that we have no metrics for that. Okay, so that being said, how can it go wrong? Can you think of any way that the MTP can go wrong? Lin or anyone?
Well, well, as you just said, the MTP itself is not necessarily sustainable, right? And having an MTP itself is not really enough. And take Patagonia is a great example. And but they are one of the very, very, very rare company, right? But even one of the very rare one, and almost the best and leading one, certainly in their industry, there's still so much that you can do. So the real or the way to really transform the entire business and sustainably, and also to take the upstream and downstream along with you, and to transform the entire value chain, and to have one purpose of yourself is not enough. And then you also need to align your own business first. And inside the sustainable principles that at the end of today, I will briefly introduce. And then not only that, you need to align with that for your entire value chain. And ideally, take the upstream and downstream and even your competitors with you to move towards the end goal. And ideally, your competitor, whoever it is right now, and at least along, can agree with your future vision, which hopefully he agrees with your MTP, right? And it doesn't really necessarily that you have to agree on every movement that you make, and it is not necessary that you have to agree on every details, because to what we do in sustainability world is we do the creative part by backcasting. You can agree on principle level, but on movement level and creativity level, it can be completely different solution arrive on the right goal or the same goal. And what you can do is to take the same MTP even for a group of stakeholders, and we call this system shift. And you take this a group of stakeholders, and somehow we align them with one massive MTP for this this group of stakeholders, maybe in one industry, maybe around one material whatsoever, for example, PET bottle or PVC or any plastic, right? And then make sure to have it to align it from the very beginning, and to make sure that everyone that you may be even competitor right now still have an inclusive role in the future, and therefore to make sure that you can get along together. So to have one MTP is very important, but we also need to take care of the implementation on the way. How do we go? How do we reach the MTP?
Any other one would like to comment? Questions or thoughts? So I've been working with this concept of the MTP we have at EXO for quite a while, and now I'm starting to be a little critical with this idea of the MTP. I mean, I think it works fantastically, and I've showed a couple of examples in which it does, but I tend to agree with Lin. I think that the utopia might not be enough, because yeah, we want a sustainable world, but I mean, that doesn't give us any indication on how to get there. So that is where the backcasting makes sense, but that is also where another approach could make sense, which is the principle approach. No long ago, I wrote an article saying in LinkedIn, just a short article, suggesting maybe it shouldn't be massive transformative purpose, but massive transformative principles. And that came to me after working with a client, Vertis, that had a program that I really celebrated, which is let me write it real quick. So it's WYKBP. And of course, that has a meaning, which is, would your kids be proud? So that is not a utopia. I mean, but I think it does refer much more as an operating principle. How do I take my steps? And if you think about it, No Child Left Behind, it does to some extent talk about the future, but it talks about the present too. It talks about principles, operating principles. And I believe that is much more clear on providing clarity on how we should be operating. And this is very much aligned also with the principles that the sustainability principles that well, some of you might know, and Lin will share with us in the future. So I'm more no problem with the utopia. I am very, but maybe the principles would make even a greater of a difference. Any comments on this? Is the speed now adjusted? Is it going a little better or still too fast? Thank you. All right, great. So we're going to jump now to one of the attributes that allows us to connect to an abundance, like really clever attribute that might be also very controversial. And of course, that is the staff on demand attribute. if we talk about Airbnb, the staff on demand would be the owners. They put together the space that they're going to rent, they clean it, they open you the door, you know, the owners are the staff on demand. Or the drivers of Uber are the staff on demand. So we have many other platforms like GitHub, well, many other examples in which we are having, instead of internal workforce, we are leveraging external people that might have it as a fundamental, the main work or just a side activity to allow them to get extra money. So rather than only owning employees, EXO leverages external people. EXOs leverage external people from simplex to complex work, or even for mission critical processes. Okay, benefits, of course, it allows you, well, first, for example, at IE, I am a professor, or even at this conference. Lin and I are part of this conference, but of course we are not part of the Planetiers. It's a staff on demand scheme. The same happens at OpenExO. We are not, we are members of OpenExO, but we are not like affiliated in an economic way, or we're not, you know, they sometimes call us, or sometimes we lead some projects, etc. But we are not part of the company. So that allows companies to access talent that might be distributed not inside the organization. And there's many very positive things. It gives agility, it gives flexibility, it enables learning, and it creates stronger bonds among core team members. Well, I don't know if this is a benefit or not, but of course, what can go wrong? Lin, please jump in. You're muted.
Okay, sorry. This one, I would say it's probably the most can go wrong, or the most we have seen that has gone wrong. Because staff on demand, to start with, is to basically free companies heavy cost on expertise level, but sometimes some companies, some business misuse it, and instead of free the heavy cost on expertise level, they free the cost of, you know, common more of a labor intensive labor cost. And that's one of the reason that why Uber isn't getting popular in many of the countries. And Germany and also Denmark has been banning Uber. And so is California, especially when you think about COVID and when we have time like this. And the good company, well, maybe it's naive to just say good or bad, or I would say more decent company or more sustainable company, the company with visionary companies, let's put it this way. And instead of laying off people or turn them into staff on demand, perhaps they do the opposite, right? And sometimes they actually get staff on demand around already. And then in this time, if you think from a company cost of view, sure, it's upside. And it will actually enable your later growth again. That's absolutely true. But if you only think about from a company point of view and neglect the overall social point of view, and then what we are seeing is basically the economy is getting more and more towards the two ends, and which will later even make it harder to recover. So that's something I see that can go wrong the most, or one of the most at least. And but at the same time, I can give you some good examples. For example, IKEA, they don't really take staff on demand. But the good case is after COVID-19, what happened to them? IKEA has thousands of suppliers. If we take them, the suppliers, as not staff on demand, more or less function on demand, right? That we used to just produce everything and we sell. But nowadays, most of the companies, we OEM everything and then we sell. So company like IKEA, the usual pay terms or payment terms, at least in China, is 60 days. Which means if you are suppliers to them, you don't really get paid first. You actually have to pay VAT first, because every month you have the VAT declaration first, and then you somehow lost money first, and then you get paid later. But after COVID-19, what IKEA has done is they have shortened their time, their payment terms from 60 days to 15 days to just allow that the smaller suppliers that to be able to survive the hard.
Can you unmute yourself, Lin? I don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened. Now I'm mute. Now I'm unmuted at least. Where was I? IKEA, supplier. So they turned the payment terms from 60 days to 15 days to just to help all the small OEM suppliers to go through, to go together, go through the hard times. And I would say this is one of the opposite examples.
Great. So we are understanding that staff on demand is not necessarily good. It's not necessarily bad. We can do it on expertise or on labor, as you were saying, or even on supplies. And it might be completely different. We can do very positive stuff on demand, and actually all of our sustainable ventures could also benefit from this attribute if we do it right, right? And anybody would like to explore a little further how they can apply staff on demand for their ventures?
Someone asked if they're going to keep it. I think they're going to keep it, and it's not only them. Also, Alibaba, Taobao. I'm sure all of you know it. And it used to be if I buy something on Alibaba, and the seller doesn't really get the money immediately. I have to receive the goods, and I have to click yes, I've received it, and then the seller gets something. And they have also changed it after COVID as well. So to basically get the small sellers through the hard time as well.
Great. Anybody would like to jump in? No? Shall I go to? Yes.
I like the service industry, like I'm an architect. I've worked with a lot of different people, engineers, drafts people, BIM people now. I've never met them personally. And I bring them in for specific projects, me and thousands of other professionals. So that creates the possibility of innovating. I don't know how to use BIM myself, but I can bring it into my project, and I wouldn't have the means to hire somebody with those capabilities. So that's I think that's an excellent example.
Absolutely. I recently used, I'm an architect too. I'm not normally doing architecture stuff, but recently a friend of mine asked me to do something, and I contracted some of the original plans via Upwork, which is one of these platforms that allows, to have internally capabilities that you wouldn't have at a different cost. So it's another example that I believe might be interesting. So any final recommendations, Lin? Any red lines that we shouldn't cross if we want to make sure that we remain on the sustainable part of the staff on demand attribute?
To me, it's, I think you need to, well, if there's any fundamental change on this, maybe we do need,
UBI? Yeah,
UBI or something. And honestly, to fundamentally change this, that there's so much that needs to be changed for the entire human species and in the infrastructure, in the governance as well. But on the surface level, at least you should not neglect the fair payment and the fair income, fair level of income to whoever, if it is your staff or if it is your staff on demand. And if you do that, I would say if it is regular staff on demand, maybe we should have asked ourselves a question, should that still be a staff on demand?
What I find, and I'm really enjoying these insights, but what I find is that there is no metrics necessarily to define, or at least they're not handy, right? What is the fair payment when I contract somebody from India, in this region of India, after these expertise, right? So, and that is very easy for me to say, I have no metric. I don't know what really is true. So I'm just going to go with this, with whatever sounds cheaper or better for myself, right? So maybe these metrics could be very interesting for that purpose. And that is related back to dashboards. How do we explicitly show the information that is relevant? By the way, dashboard, as I said, is another of these attributes. You'll see there's systematic connections between
That's
across.
absolutely a good idea, because the way in fashion industry, especially if this fashion brand is a bit kind of pioneer in sustainability world, most of the brands start fair wage based program. And how do you define fair wage or decent wage? It's really hard to define, as you say. So basically in each of the countries, they start program and project to first define what is fair wage, and then they kind of measure the increasing the speed of increasing the income for the workers or something like that. But I do agree it's very hard to have a universal matrix on what is decent, what is fair on that level. And that's one of the lessons that we have learned after so many years of sustainability work, is that everything is complex. Nothing is perfect.
I'd like to add in, Uberize has become a verb because it's nowadays is so widely spread. And we know now that there's a terrible downside to it, because people don't have their rights and don't have medical care and all of that. And in a lot of places, there's got to be public policies. We have to work together with public policies to prevent that from happening. And then this model would not have spread so wide and large as it is. It would have adapted to include the inclusion of these workers in society.
Do you think what would be the best context to start applying those principles, Alexandra? I assume you're calling from Europe, right? Somewhere in Europe.
I'm in Lisbon, but I just moved here from San Francisco, and right now I just voted, and there's a proposition on the ballot about can these companies go on not considering the drivers as employees, because it's the whole system where you live needs to be considered. And without public policies, not only that, a lot of different issues, you can't move ahead really in sustainable construction, in sustainable cities, and in the fashion industry. There's got to be guidelines that public policies establish.
Any final thank you, Alexandra, very much for your insights and comments. Any other one would like to jump in? Anyone else? No? Okay, so we're going to proceed. Ling is reminding me that we've already covered an hour and we still have a lot of attributes. Yeah, we have 8 to cover. I don't think we're going to necessarily dedicate as much depth or time to each one of them, but let's go for the next one, which is community and crowd. So community and crowd, what is the community that our example Airbnb leverages? Well, it is 2 communities, the travelers around the world, which is not really a community. I mean, how do you define the community? Where do you call the community of travelers around the world? It's pretty hard to leverage as a community if you don't have a more specific context. This Airbnb was born initially for the attendees of a conference in San Francisco, I believe, I don't know if it was a hacking or programming conference that was overbooked, and there were no spaces for people to go. So the founders decided to create for that specific community of people that were left behind or left outside with no hotel, those attendees to the conference, to serve the needs of that specific community. So it was easy to find them and to address them. That is an important virtue of a community. Ideally, it'll be already aggregated, and what you do is offer value to them, right? And what other community do they serve, or do they live from? Well, the blog post and blogs and posts about travels and travel trips of these communities, that is ourselves, right? So there's a lot of communities. One very clear example is the TEDx community. TED was a closed ecosystem of, again, in San Francisco, I believe, very expensive access to high-level conferences until Chris Anderson decided to open the community to communities internationally, worldwide, that would be glad to share that mission, that MTP of ideas worth sharing, which is the higher purpose of TED, right? And they allowed people internationally to replicate their functions and to aggregate their communities to the greater community. So the Kickstarter community allows you to do many, many different things. For example, to test an idea or concept before even produce it, and to have a validation or even investment prior to the actual delivery. So the communities allow you to do things that you could not do in the past. There's the community and there's the crowd. We combine these terms, or we use them. They're not, in my opinion, they're not necessarily the same, because community reflects or represents like a group of people with which there is an exchange, a bidirectional interaction. The crowd might be a larger community that not necessarily have an interaction with. Maybe the crowd of EXO is the people that have read the book or attended some workshop, but not necessarily are part of the community. So, you know, the community sounds really good. You can build communities, and Chris Anderson, if you build communities and you think and you do things in public, you don't have to find the right people; they will find you. So, again, the same quote in case it wasn't clear enough, and examples of communities. So, well, this represents the difference between communities and crowd, and I believe the benefits of communities seem quite obvious. I would say that today, if you tell me the size of your community, the size of the community that you're trying to leverage, I'll tell you the potential impact that you might have, right? So identify communities and making sure that you serve those communities is a very important part of your EXO strategy. Okay, very dependent again on the massive transformative purpose. But what can go wrong? I want to sparkle the debate around communities going wrong with this idea of the polarization. As an architect and urbanist, I'm quite concerned about the public space. And I see that the virtual public space, the virtual communities are not an exact representation of what happens, the serendipity that happens in the streets, because in the streets, typically, if it's not to specify, you'd find a variety of different people. That is what makes the city vibrant, right? You find people that are from completely different backgrounds on ideologies, etc. In the virtual communities, we tend to do the opposite. We tend to exclude people that do not share our understanding, our vision, our perspective. And at the end of the day, these communities are self-reinforcing mechanisms of ideologies or prejudices, and they actually can lead to the scaling of the fake news, or to these effects, polarizing effects that we're seeing across Europe and the world. I would say that our communities are going crazy. In Spain, definitely. And I assume that in many parts of the world, the polarization of communities is growing, unfortunately, due to the role of algorithms and virtual communities. So that is my take on how communities can go wrong. What do you think? Okay, so maybe not many examples. Still, just because it can go wrong doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it or we shouldn't try to leverage it. I mean, as I said, if we want to scale our impact, it's all about motivating the right people into for the right purpose, and that is having a clear sense of community and that relationship that we should have with our community. Another attribute, also very clear, these attributes really relevant now. Everything is data. The economy is all about data. Google is all about data, and UPS is all about data, and rerouting data. You know, everything is data is the new oil. I read it, a famous economist article not too long ago. So if data is the new oil, how do we make sense of data? That is by means of using algorithms, right? Probably it makes a lot of sense to start, I mean, not blindfolded, but to start collecting the data about what we're doing, because probably if anything can be done in the near future by an algorithm, it will. And the algorithms so far feed out of data. So we need data to fine tune those algorithms. I recently read research by I don't know if it was a Google scholar suggesting that they are trying to come up with a new system for the perfection of the algorithms that renders more insights than the number of insights that you feed the algorithm with. So I think it's enough just one data algorithm, something like that. But well, until that happens, obviously we need a lot of data, and we need algorithms to manage that data. So what is the algorithm in Airbnb? Well, it's the recommendations in general that we either suffer or benefit from when we are trying to travel, or once we make a research of a city or Lisbon in internet, then I'm going to be fried with destinations in Lisbon, whether I want them or not, right? A lot of companies are now basing the business model around data. And again, we can assume, as Francisco Palau suggested, Francisco Palau is one of the creators of the OpenExO platform. And he's an AI PhD, and he said that if anything can be done in the future by an algorithm, it will. So algorithm brings us a lot of benefits, but also it might be pretty clear how they can go wrong. Lin, can you bring some light?
Well, I think algorithm itself and data itself and AI itself is really double-edged sword, right? First, the first concern is privacy issue. I don't really need to elaborate that much. And also, the way that AI works so far is basically based on historical data. And then you somehow take the historical data and analyze the trend and foreseeing or forecast what's it going to need and what's going to be. And that's so far the way. And that brings problem itself, because the result of the algorithm itself is somehow biased by historical behavior already. So which means it may give people less of opportunity to actually improve or behave differently or change. And sometimes it can be even racist. And the way I see it, the main problem of the main problem of the algorithm so far is that since the mechanism of the feature itself of that it processed the historical data and forecast the future, which actually basically it leaves an impossible job for the data to define an intent, because it only takes whatever happens. And however, to get ourselves into a sustainable path, we actually do need to leave the current trajectory, because the current trajectory, if we forecast this way, currently we're not in a sustainable system. And if we forecast our way still based on what happened, it's not going to, we will not be out from this system. So in sustainable world, when we transform ourselves, we need to start with backcasting. We understand what is the basic sustainability principle is from a system point of view, from a holistic point of view, and what kind of sustainable future we want to create for a company, for an organization, for a family, for individual. And that's also how do human works. When we plan our personal life, we don't take historical data and we analyze and the trend. Okay, I for example, myself, I have been to university in Shanghai. And then I moved to Sweden for my master's. And it looks like it seems, oh, I am going to the north, so I should even move to North Pole or something. No one takes it away, right? The personal life we take from where we want to be and what we want to be. So should be the sustainability strategic way. But the only difference is we need to understand the end game rule. What is the rules to win? And we can actually answer that question. But with the current way of AI working and algorithm, there's no way it's going to figure it out themselves and take us the way to that end.
Thank you, Lin. I think there's also a fundamental danger of this data approach, which is the data monopolies, right? There's this winner takes all effect. in which the one that has more data has control, right? And that is why all of the companies, like even the social media companies, or were jumping into the self-driving car. They were not so interested about the industry, they were interested about the data collection, right? Because if you have the data, you can improve systematically, and that is what a car is now. The self-driving car data capturing sensors, and you have the data, you have increased quality recommendations. So there is this danger of creating monopolies, which I believe is to some extent unsustainable too. You talk about the privacy and the limitations, and I think all that makes complete sense. I am a big defendant also of the distribution, the decentralization, and I believe that a decentralized versus a centralized approach would also be much more resilient and more effective. I'm entertaining this concept of the, well, myself, because I read it somewhere, of the minimum viable data, which is something that I really like. What is the minimum amount of data with which you can be effective? Because our trend now is let's collect as much as we can, let's bring as much as we can, and we'll make of use data later. And that is the opposite of what we see in nature. Having studying swarms and these kind of collective intelligence behavior in social species, and trying to understand, for example, how does a flock of birds work? How does it function, right? And interestingly, one bird just looks to 4 or 5 adjacent birds that he fixes temporarily, and I'm going to look at this one and this one and this one. I'm going to adjust my vector, my velocity, my speed, my direction to what I see, the aggregate of 5 other individuals. So just with 5 little references, with that minimum viable data, the birds are able to do something that prove us completely stupid, which really bothers me actually as an architect too. If you compare the thousands and thousands of these little birds with little brains too, and how they dance with 0 collisions, with no jams, and they warm up. They flock because they can, they flock because they want, and we do the opposite. We're jammed because we don't know better. Probably, you know, when we think about solutions for this, and I intervene in a solution with the municipality of Miami, we were trying to reduce traffic. Sorry, can you still hear me? Yeah, so we were trying to reduce traffic over there, and the majority of the teams were trying to centralize big pools of data, and our approach was the opposite. What if we try to increase the vehicle-to-vehicle communication, the decentralized approach to data, in order to render more resilience? Here, I was just making use of these biomimicry principles, and one of them is precisely redundance and the simple repetition of in this case, data points. So just I believe an original approach that I wanted to share with you. We also have leverage assets. I don't know if you'd like to add anything to this.
Me?
Yes, well, anyone. And you
sure, go ahead. If you don't want to add anything to this, I can, in the precautionary tales, I can talk about it.
Oh, please, please. Go ahead.
Now?
Oh, you mean of leverage asset? Okay, great. So leverage asset, one example we've already talked about, and we see that this is what is making the demand, the supply drop. You're using other people's money by leveraging other people's assets, which seems like a magic formula. Now, what can go wrong here? Lin.
Well, the original idea of leverage some asset is need to be kind of asset ready, right? And then you don't really utilize it, which means the resource efficiency of those assets are really low. And then if you leverage it, of course, the marginary cost is really low as well. That was the original idea. However, what has happened is, for example, share economy, and quite often Airbnb is a really good example, because the assets are there more or less, right? And you just utilize it. You did not really build anything or make anything out of nowhere and just to share, but it's not the case. And I can give you really good examples later for something went really wrong in China.
If I could add here, that the original idea of Airbnb was not for you to have another asset to make it available for Airbnb. It was for you to make your own home your
Exactly.
original one asset, make it available. And when that went wrong, then it created a whole series of very big problems for cities that are now having to restrain what is allowed to be used. So it's how things grow out of control.
Alexandra, I think that's brilliant. So introducing that principle of, yes, we will let you leverage assets as long as you typically use them, or as long as you pre-own them. Well, that will be difficult to define, but I think that's brilliant. That is an amazing boundary, a sustainable boundary probably that we could impose. Yeah, that really nice. I can think in our field, Alexandra, another problem related to leverage assets, another way in which it can go wrong, is the gentrification, right? If you go to Barcelona, for example, or Lisbon probably, you know, some people are pushed out of the city. Some visitors even are pushed out of the city because the rental spaces for the you know, the places in the city center are thriving, are rising dramatically. So they can no longer afford to buy or to live there, because others, if they buy those spaces, could make some benefit out of it. So very much related to what you just said, Alexandra. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Anyone else? Any comment? No? Just a reminder, these attributes that we propose, this is a slide that I made to tell my students or my participants that the attributes should not be the topping of our initiatives, okay? It should be completely foundational to what we are doing. I'm suggesting these attributes with the sustainability boundaries that we are proposing could be used to massively reinterpret the projects that we have in front of us, even radically, if you let me say so. You go to the root following Antonio Gaudi's suggestion. The originality is at the origin, at the root. So you go there and you try to imagine in an exaggerated manner what your initiative would look like if you were the epitome of one of these attributes, or a combination of those, of some of those attributes. And then you start building your project on top of that. It's not something that you add at the end. It's something that must be foundational, because it's going to inform the rest of the decisions. Okay, so that being said, engagement. Okay, so engagement is another of these attributes that is very much related to, of course, participation, community, to MTP. So very related, correlated, as we've insisted so far. In our example of Airbnb, the engagement mechanism is the ranking system, both for places and travelers. That is what is preventing me to access this Thai tea house, probably the ranking mechanism. So they work fantastically. These little stars of a social rating work fantastically, and they are being applied across platforms in a very effective way. Duolingo is this learning platform that is very much engaged via gamification mechanisms. Probably you know, our reality is all based on incentives, and coming up with the mechanisms, the engagement mechanisms, whether or not they're gamification, that allow for that engagement is critical. I was saying that these principles of engagement work fantastically, and we have many examples of them. One of them is the X Prize Foundation, this capability of aggregating talent from all across the world for very wicked and complicated problems. They give $10 million prizes to the group that is able to solve this wicked problem if they solve it. So they get entries from 100 groups, and they only need to pay one. So that would be a staff on demand mechanism, right, for high expertise. I think that would be a positive example, but how can these go wrong? How can engagement go wrong?
Sorry?
You mentioned the X Prize?
Yes.
And a lot of other competitions. It's staff on demand, but usually you have to put up a lot of work up front, a lot of hours from different experts, and only one gets the prize. So the use of resources is not optimized there, I don't think.
So we've architects.
I don't know an alternative, but that's the downside.
we architects have been used to that scheme for quite some time, right? Which is, I believe, not necessarily good, but at least in the context of the X Prizes, it's really bold, aspirational, moonshot thinking projects. And the people that participate have clarity around that scheme. It's something that is going to last some months or maybe a little longer, but it starts at it ends. It's not a modus operandi, right, for their career path, which happens to us architects. So in that sense, I mean, I would rather see the benefits rather than the inconvenience, but I understand your point. It might have something, you know, that could be worked around a little more. Anybody else? Can you think of how engagement can go wrong? Can go, for example, unsustainable?
Okay, if no one else is going to comment it, then I will go ahead. And when you talk about participation, Diego, just now, and this suddenly reminded me why it works so well, because one of the basic human needs is participation. So this one fulfill it on surface level, but on any kind of niche, if you overfill it with some in short amount of time, if you fulfill one need out of the others too much, it necessarily it will create the imbalance of the other needs not met, and that is what we see here actually. And for engagement, I think most of the business right now using apps whatsoever and likes and Facebook and to start with and all those kinds, and now it's a million more. They have been working really, really well. They really have find a way to get us attractive to that, well, even addictive to that, right? And then by being addictive to that, then it's not a true satisfier anymore. It's actually a pseudo satisfier. And then, well, all those health problems, and think about how much time that we could have spent with our kids, or our kids could have spent with us instead of watching their phone, right? And that's one. Also, I think this somehow attract overconsumption even more. And it just makes you feel that I do need it, and I do need the likes from that new jacket, but do you really need it? And then all the happiness and abundance somehow comes from the over consumption, which again will later come back to us, because we cannot really continue this circle anymore.
Absolutely, Lin. I think there's yet one more danger to be mentioned, which is the engagement around what? I mean, typically when you have an engagement mechanism, there is an incentive mechanism too. And we should beware of those incentives. For example, I've worked in the past creating platforms for social virtual interaction. And there is these people that I really hate that do these aberrations, I call them, which are things that are coherent to the incentives and the mechanisms that they're given, but they're destructive to the aim of the platform. For example, you know, over presence. So you know that if you have if you are the person that posts more entries and participates most, you're going to get more recognition, more reward. And what you end up doing is just, you know, posting valueless content. So all of these incentives, all of these algorithms and to propose the incentives for the engagement, I think they're non-obvious. As you like to remind us, it's a complex system that needs to be considered in all its complexity. So related to the engagement, those incentives, I believe, are very, very important. Any other comment that you'd like to add to this? Okay, so we're going to jump to interfaces. Interfaces is pretty easy. I mean, it's the way to connect platform. It's the visual way in a platform to connect, in the case of Airbnb, owners and travelers. In general, is the offering with a demand, for example, right? So the platform has, you know, a lot of the interface is a fundamental part. I mean, in the past it was physical, now it's completely virtual and digital. And there's a lot of knowledge about how to make these interfaces work. There is a lot of aggregated knowledge, but we can learn from these platforms. The simpler, the better. There's many benefits of using these interfaces. It allows you to create the first filtering of information and to bridge abundances. I mean, this is one fundamental mechanism that we use to put in place. How can it go wrong? Anybody?
I think one of the things that can go wrong is about fake news and all the data that we are searching, and we don't know if they are effectively true.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. Yes, the fake news. If we are extrapolating the responsibility of filtering to the interfaces, we are no longer filters. So that means that we are subjective to fake news and manipulation. Yes. Anything else? No? Okay, I cannot really think of more examples right now. So I'm going to jump to dashboards. Galileo used to say, measure what is measurable and what is not measurable and make it measurable. I don't know to what extent I agree with this, but there's a quote. And so in our example, Airbnb suggests real-time key metric analysis for the internal staff and also for the users. So that brings us a first question. Dashboard is all about sharing information, but what information are you sharing? What is the source? And who are you sharing it with? So very much related to the rest of the attributes. Dashboards are fundamental parts of Facebook, of Google, Oracle, LinkedIn, Twitter, and very much related, as I was saying, with the metrics, with the incentives. The clarity and the transparency around those dashboards is also quite interesting. And there's many successful examples of companies, for example, sharing their CO2 emissions in their website, which I found it was, I don't know if this was IKEA or who it was, but I found it like really, well, at least transparent to the extent of at least transparent. And I kind of like that. But see, that might not work in every context. You need to be careful with what information you're sharing where, and so the contextual validity of the information, I believe, is relevant. Just as a suggestion here, there is many cases that we've seen applying these dashboards with massive success. It allow you to measure critical growth drivers and to create a framework to manage fast growth. It enables learning, it enables collaboration at speed, it enables an open atmosphere, and it showcases, make errors evident. So that is pretty good, very interesting. Lin, can you think of any examples in which these dashboards can go wrong?
Well, I think when we talk about dashboard, our original idea in attributes is it's used internally, right? So as you say, what's get measured gets done internally. If you don't, especially internally, it really works well. But there also can be potential problem of what you just said. If some companies, pioneers, they choose to transparent their CO2 emission, for example, and some are not. And this is what we have to be cautious a bit, because sometimes people do point fingers if you are too transparent. And this is also sometime that the way we see it is the real pioneers, they measure sustainability and they make progress around it. But once they're attacked by someone, they're never going to transparent because they got fingers pointed to them. And I think this is related to external. So it's not really the same sense of dashboard that we talk about, the attributes, which refers to internal of the organization more. But still, I think from a sustainability point of view, there will be such concern. And most of the, I would say, leading companies, they choose to transparent it, but they also get punched if they haven't met their target anyway. And maybe this is somehow related to human nature itself, that I personally do not have an answer or a simple answer to how do we unfold this problem, or how do we actually get ourselves or everyone else to not pointing fingers to the good ones instead of pushing everyone? And again, it's not a simple question, but to choose to, I think it takes courage and commitment to choose to transparent your dashboard, especially when you have the potential scandals around it. And also those are more of externally, but internally, I think if you measure too much, or if you measure everything, if you haven't thought through your dashboard, it can turn into micromanagement. And one of the very successful hot pot restaurants in China has gone through their turbulence, so to say. It used to be they measure everything, and they measure the speed that you fill up the guest cup. And so the dashboard basically is, if the cup is empty for more than 30 seconds and you get you as a waiter or waitress, you get some KPIs down. And then it turns out even the guests saying, I don't want this anymore, but they still have to fill it, which causes lots of waste. So again, should we use dashboard on everything, or should we turn it into a purpose-driven metrics, or what is the appropriate way? It's not a simple question. It's not a simple answer. I personally don't have the answer yet.
There's one example that is coming to my mind, which is the fact that it's not an example I prepared, sorry about this, but the Norwegian government funding the plotting of the surveying of the Amazon, the Amazon forest. And what they're doing apparently is putting the means to scan all of the forest and to identify where the deforestation is happening. That with a 5-meter resolution, I understand, and updated every 2 or 3 days, that would give massive clarity to those interested on what the advancements of the deforestation or reforestation offers them the efforts are going. So that is an example of a dashboard. I mean, we are giving absolute transparency of the deforestation or reforestation, well, deforestation in the Amazonia, and I believe it's very much related to sustainability. I do have an intuition of the risks that might have, but I don't see any negatives so far. Maybe some of you can throw some light to this. Do you see any risk on this initiative?
I really, really like this example because dashboards need to be third-party verified. I cannot verify and publish my measurements. It needs to be third-party verified. In this specific case of the Amazon, the Brazilian government is trying to deny the data. So if you have a third party recognized, obviously, scanning and putting the data out there, I think is fundamental. And also for any kind of organization, specific industries have specific KPIs. And then instead of going through extensive certification programs, you can decide what the important KPIs are for you, have them third party verified, and make them public. Try to simplify the process. And the example Lin gave is amazing. Then instead of having 350 indicators, no, choose the most important for you and for your industry, and work on those. Maybe make it simpler and more cost effective. So,
this is really interesting. So do you think maybe, I said that I'm passionate about decentralization. Do you think this would be the one thing that should be to some extent centralized? You mentioned explicitly third party. You didn't imply centralized metrics or dashboards. Do you think we would rather centralize the metrics or the dashboards, or do you think they should still be decentralized?
No, totally decentralized. You have a number of organizations who can certify your carbon footprint, your water use, doesn't have to be, it has to be an accredited organization doing the certification, and that's it. And
yeah,
totally decentralized.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you, Alexandra. Anybody else?
I would like to share something. It's important to acknowledge that the dashboard cannot map all the complexity that we're all in. And sometimes if you get just the dashboard as your guideline or your reference, you can become blind. And so I don't know, it's just about having an exercise inside of you, like you're seeing the dashboard, but it's much more than that. Yeah, and acknowledge that the dashboards, they cannot measure everything, and there are things out there that is important for you, and it's not in the dashboard.
So yesterday we had in the conversation biologist that she was studying, I believe, well, nature, and she mentioned at some point the reproduction of the white rhino, and we're talking about mosquitoes and elephants and all that, and she explained clearly all of those interdependencies between the, because we challenged her to justify the need for mosquitoes almost in a provocative, fun way, and she did actually. She did pretty convincingly, I would say. But she was precisely talking about complexity, and your point, and I'll write it down, is that these dashboards are reductionist and do not represent the complexity, right? Especially in the sustainability or the natural context. Thank you. That's an amazing insight. Thank you very much.
This actually also reminded me that the story I've given, and they have turned from over 100 KPIs to measure how the consumer or customer are satisfied, to break it down, like the silly ones that I've mentioned. Eventually, they just left one, is to basically randomly interview people at the door. Are you happy with it? And will you come back? So maybe, again, the dashboard should not be only on behavior level or activity level. It really needs to be on principle level or purpose level.
Hi.
Hello, Maria.
Can I just say something too?
Yes.
Relates to the last two.
Maria, you froze. Okay, whenever she comes back, we will invite her back. Okay. Great. Anybody? Maria, we've lost you. Can you repeat your question, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
We can hear you.
Okay. I was just saying that one word.
Yes, we still hear you. Yes. Maybe you want to turn off your video.
You are mute right now. Maria, if you wish to speak, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I lost you. That's why I was not answering.
No problem.
Short version, one word that I kept with me in my mind the whole section was detachment. And I think it's the word for now, which is people are talking about how dashboards provide you information, but it's important to know what that information means. I think detachment expresses this gap between the information and its meaning. And also, since the beginning, when you were talking about using other people's assets, even when you have Uber, for example, they don't have the assets themselves, and in Airbnb they don't have the houses themselves, but those assets exist, and those resources are being used. And this is another detachment between these exponential growing, digital growing, and for companies and resources that are being used. And detachment was also a keyword that kept with me when Alexandra was talking about Uber drivers that are not employers. And Lin said there's a point where companies should think, should this be my employer, or should I keep using this on this basis? That I don't remember the staff on demand. So I think the very interesting question here is how can we use these tools that you are presenting for Exponential to actually link the digital world and its benefits with the environmental crisis that we are living now. And with the environmental crisis and the use of natural resources, but also the social crisis, it's craving for a slowdown of the economy. Can this exponential behavior actually be used to exponential the slowdown of the economy? I think this is difficult, but I think that's where we are living, because you have been both giving negative and positive impacts of these tools, and I think it's where the link that has to be the question.
Maria, that's an excellent question. That actually answers exactly why we're here, because our answer to that is that we should tackle the sustainability part first and come up with the actions and creative solutions first, and then utilize the or leverage the attributes and Exponential to help it to grow. And it's just because today we are running it in the opposite way, because we wanted people to actually think this can be a double-edged sword. And but your question is so well tied back to the entire theme. So it's just a proof of that we have been thinking it in the really right direction. So if you can please bear us for another 15 minutes more, and we will try to answer your question.
So great, thank you for your participation once again. This makes it really interesting. There is one more attribute, which is the experimentation attribute. I told you at some point that scalable learning should be the goal, the only sustainable probably goal of the organizations over time. That's why so many companies are creating their own universities, and they are starting to conceive the organizations as airports in which they have the ability to attract talent and to make that talent or those initiatives take off, right? So that approach of scalable learning is only possible if we have scalable experimentation, right? Astro Teller from Google X Ventures suggested that the space you give for people to failure is the space you give them for success. So this doesn't happen on the void. This happens with massive failures. This happened with systematic experimentation. Airbnb, it has adopted the lean startup approach. Probably every major company is doing this. And well, we know that everything in our business plan, we used to do business plans in the past, plans for 4 years, 5 years, etc. Everything, we should interpret it as a hypothesis. That is the main message of the lean startup approach and Steve Blank. Nothing survives reality, so you better take everything that you have in your hypothesis, in your business plan, and consider it an hypothesis. This was the case for startups. I believe now it is time, under these massive changes, to consider ourselves as in a similar point as startups with legacy organizations. Maybe all of the certainties that we had assimilated or proved in the past right now need to be revisited. All of those assumptions need to be turned into hypotheses once again to make sure that what we're doing is relevant. So for that purpose, experimentation, prototyping is the attribute, and we consider it to be one of the most important attributes of all of the EXO attributes. So we have references that I very much like the Adobe Red program. Every new employee receives a box with $2,000. I might not have all of the data right, but when they are welcome with the welcoming package, they receive these keys, and with the capability to invest that money in whatever program related to the purpose of Adobe, whatever program they might want. So it's protocol, I would say, that it's easy to apply and that completely changes or might be able to change the logic within the company, justifying behaviors that previously were had no covering umbrella, right? Another example that I like is Amazon Institutional Yes. Yes, we are going to let you experiment with this. Yes, we are going to answer positively to your question or to your request, as long as it is once again related to your initiative, to our purpose. And a no will necessarily come with a justification, with a written justification to make sure that we don't have the no by default. Little things that make big differences, said Malcolm Gladwell in the past. I believe those protocols precisely represent that aggregated knowledge, and it's easy to embrace.
No meu, tu clicas aqui.
It's easy to embrace these protocols in pretty much any context with slight tweaks that we can make to make them relevant in our context. So many companies that take experimentation as the main objective. What can go wrong with this? Anyone?
Well, I think if you work expectations in startup, the entire thinking is based on that we do it fast, right? And later we order it, we refine it, and we loop around all the time. And if we push that too much, then that may or give people a feeling or impression that think through isn't important anymore, because later I can improve it.
I think experimentation is really good for the discovery phase and for some phases at the execution. And I think I would rather be in a context in which I experiment a lot, because that probably means that I'm going to be learning a lot. I'm going to have more fun. But I understand that those might not necessarily be the sole objectives of the company. You know, the company is also about efficiency, and that not necessarily comes solely from experimentation. I mean, that would be my take on this. If anybody wants to complete it before I jump to the next one.
That's a really difficult one. And I would dare say that it depends on the company's MTP. Like you mentioned Amazon. Amazon is crushing competition, destroying smaller PMEs because it allows experimentation. It comes up with very efficient ideas and schemes, but on the long run, it's not for the good.
Yeah, so they have the means to experiment much faster than others, right? Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to cover the two final attributes very fast. Autonomy. Autonomy is actually one of my preferred ones. Of course, very much related with decentralization, distribution, etc. And in that aim to seek collective intelligence, which I believe is or should be the aim of the new organizations, I think the autonomy is a fundamental principle. I mean, the birds swarm in that way, or flock in that way, or the fish flock in that way because they can, because they're free to do it first. And then there's the rest, right? I mean, I know it is an oversimplification, but I believe autonomy to be one of the most important ones. And of course, see, everybody has their preferred. This is describing some autonomy squad at Spotify, etc. Well, some quotes that I'm not going to stop at right now. Some examples of companies successfully using autonomy at different levels, at an individual level, at a group level, at a collective level, or organizational level. Some of them are working, some of them are not. Holacracy, I think it's still too prescriptive, but in general, I would say autonomy is very much related to this capability of experimentation and personal growth and purpose too. So I'd rather have more than less of this one. You know, many examples. This one I loved when I heard about it, the MIT Media Lab Disobedience Award. I loved it. I just leave it here as an image to populate your minds. And I don't know if you want to stop here. What can be wrong with autonomy? Well, maybe we can think of something. Lin? Probably we'll find something.
Personal, I'm in favor of this as well. And I do believe in collective leadership as well. So, and what can go wrong? This is a hard one.
I think when we are free to choose something, sometimes we don't make a good choice. And I think this could be a problem in a system that have algorithms to make all decisions for us in certain times.
Yeah, I understand you're suggesting autonomy as interpreted as the autonomous intelligence, autonomous driving and so on. In this case, it was more of a organizational principle in which persons are entitled and responsible for their own decisions. But I take your point too, thank you. The final one, because I want to protect your time, Lin, for your examples, right? You wanna?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the final one is the social. Probably this one is the attribute that nobody enjoys too much. I mean, it's like the black sheep of all of the attributes. And yet I would say once again, I believe this one might be one of the most important ones, especially when we are aiming towards collective intelligence. So I think these social, meaning platforms such as this one, Zoom or Slack, etc., might be the technologies that will bleach the glue out of traditional organizations. And I'm quoting here Paul Sappho. These digital technologies will make a huge of a difference because they are a substitute for hierarchy. So beware of these technologies. Just one final recommendation, take a look at Rome research, which is finally one of those technologies that is really working in a distributed way and allows you to have, for example, a research in which you're not pre-imposing a hierarchy. You're not necessarily taking your notes into a document that is going to live into a folder that is going to be archived into a root, etc. You can just take notes and decide which terms are going to be the bridges or hyperlinks with other terms in across your research. So what you create is, instead of a hierarchy of a research, you create a graph of research. Now I'm using it. It's a social tool because it allows you to leverage all of that research with other researchers, and I'm finding it just amazing. It is probably the only digital trace that I would like to leave to my children, you know, beyond some things that I'm kind of proud of, but that is probably the one thing that I want to leave my children's, my Rome research graphs, because I believe it's an externalization of my brain or shared brain with several communities. So just take a look at it as a suggestion. And now I'm going to hand it over to Lin for the closing and for her a couple of examples.
Can you stop sharing, Diego? Okay. Thank you very much for the question that how can this be helping us to be more sustainable, because fundamentally that's what all of us want. And really exponential, but not sustainable. And as well, the asset itself needs to be,
I think we lost Lin.
Oh, yes.
No, she is here, but is mute. I think it's the internet.
There we go.
Okay.
We have it back.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, let me try again. Sorry.
We don't see the. Okay, now we see.
I'm trying to get it. I'm trying to get it. So hold on. So even something when you have a very good purpose, have a massive transformative purpose, and if you haven't think through from the very beginning, it can still go exponentially, but the wrong direction, which means you're exponentially wrong. So this is something happened in China, and all the bikes you have seen to the right are share bikes, and they are dog free. You don't have to. They don't need to be tied to anyone because each of them have some QR code that you can scan, and we pay very conveniently in China. And to the left corner of the on the screen is how do we use it. Basically, you can locate more or less each of the bike, but obviously just around you. There's no point of located kilometers away. So it resolved the problem of dock, and it resolved the problem of last kilometers. And so millions of people agrees, and therefore within 10 years, there are more than within 3 years, there are more than 60 companies doing sharing bikes in China. And this OFO, is the biggest and is also the first one. So within 3 years only, it operates in 21 countries and have over 250 cities. And we have more than 10 million of their bike, only this one standalone. And not to mention, why can't I click it down? Okay, do you see my next page? I'm not
Seeing
seeing
the yellow bikes.
Yes,
Yeah.
only.
yellow bikes. Sure.
Okay, now it is.
Now. So, it's not only yellow bikes. It's red, it's orange, it's green, it's blue. It's different shades of blue. It's more than 60 of those bikes, and they have really well used all the I wouldn't say all the attributes, but most of the attributes that they can use, and they really ticked everything. So within 3 years, they grow like this. And what happened? This is what happened. And on the background, it's not some waves in the ocean or the field. They're all wasted bicycles. And some of them not really well designed and for maintenance, for example, and people are not really careful enough when you ride such a bike. And so loads of different problems. And this is what happens. And this is all with different colors. This is not it's not performing art. This is a true dump in a park, and actually in Shanghai. So what happens personally, I think, without the assets here, obviously those are assets, and they have take matters from the Earth's crust and they build something out of it, but the assets are not idling. So the assets they have been leveraged, the assets, but the assets are built from zero to whatever. And then plus they oversupply a bit. And this is what happened. Number 2, and Luckin Coffee. This is the biggest coffee chain in China, surpassed Starbucks. But all of their stores are more or less just a takeaway stand. And they have expanded to 4,000 stores within 3 years as well. But it's just a pickup. And what we order is we order through an app. They can send it, and we can go to a store to pick it up as well. But since it's just a pick up or just take away, there's almost no place to drink. And then it turns like this. Because talking about, you don't use one-time cup is not relevant there, because that is their nature of business, is to use one cup, and then they have grown this way. Well, then we have talked about the rest. So basically what we have seen is the way we see it is sustainability takes care of the effectiveness of the business or the transformation. And we need to make sure that we create positive impact. And then coupled with efficiency and exponential attributes, we can make it 10 times or even more faster. So be sure that we have the right direction first. And then how can we be sure have the right direction? And I will fast forward all this, and this is why we're here. And I think you know about why we're here. Basically, what we are trying to.
Lin, sorry.
Yes.
You can use more 5-10 minutes, okay? You don't have to. Okay.
Oh, it's really. Okay. Is that a really?
Yes, you can use it, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So basically, we have just said sustainability is really a complex problem or a complex issue. And when we deal with complex issue, and system thinking is very much needed. And otherwise, we turn into the problem of one problem is tackled and the other problem are created. Is just like the cases before. So how do we take system view away from this reductionism point of view? Because all the elements, all the elements inside the system has linkage to all the other elements. That's what the part that we need to take account into. And then how? This is examples. And when we tackle the problem of system problem, and the first thing we need is common language to describe it. And without a common language to describe it, there's almost no way for us to find a solution. And the typical example will be sustainability. I'm pretty sure if we are 20 online today, to each individual of us, we understand sustainability, this word, in 20 different ways. And if that's the case, how can we actually figure out the solutions that we want to guide us to the sustainability future? And these are our way. What I have showed is just our way. By the way, it's the natural step way. Our way to describe this what is sustainability. So what we have, to start with is funnel. It's just a metaphor to describe the problem. So we have population growth, like health, and then, however, the matter on the Earth is not relatively. We are a matter-closed system. Basically, ever since Big Bang, there's no more matter come onto the planet anymore. It's all about how do we combine all of them. And so while time goes by, what we need to avoid is to hit the side of the funnel, because in that case we cannot really navigate it through. While time goes by, the resource is declining, right? We are facing more and more threats. So this is already an optimistic thinking or image already. It's not for sure that we can find the open up on time. And the second one is what we do in the natural step is we study how the system is working. And then we come up with the principles of what full sustainability is. So our way of defining sustainability is not defining what we should do. It's actually defining what we should not do. And those are the principles you should not violate. However, we are doing it right now anyway. And I'm just going to give you a very simple version. So this is our system, and we have two circles, more or less. Above is biosphere, and under is lithosphere. And we circle around in very different speed. And in the middle, it's us, human. It's human society. So for us, it's actually open system for energy. We just receive energy and the sun just works. And that's why in EXO work, we actually believe energy is not a problem. But personally, I still do believe it's not a problem, but we still have to fix the problem. However, it's matter closed, nothing disappears, everything disperses, however. And if we do not interfere these two cycles ourselves, the only thing that can get matters from lithosphere to biosphere are volcano eruptions or weathering. There's more or less no other way to get out. However, with us in it, it's a very different story. So we dig up relatively large flows of matters from the Earth's crust, and those are our raw materials. We more or less use, more or less all the materials are from Earth's crust. And not only that, we also combine small molecules into big molecules. We have man-made objects, such as plastic. And those are foreign to nature, so it has a hard time to digest. And in those two cases, we accumulate whatever we dig up, and we also accumulate whatever we have made, the man-made stuff, in the nature. And the third way is not only that, we also, for example, we physically harm the nature's ability to cycle itself as well. For example, we fish, it's okay, but we overfish. And we also cut down the rainforest. And those are all the physical examples. And also, For the third one, for the fourth one, since we are for the entire planet, quite often we create barriers to other people to meet their basic needs. And those are a bit linked to the staff on demand, for example. So with us, the human society inside this nature cycle, and we somehow interfere the cycle in those 4 ways. Therefore, if we don't, let's imagine if we do not interfere it, and more or less it will be sustainable, which means on principle level, whatever you do in a sustainable society, whatever you do, you should not systematically increase the concentration level of the stuff, the substance that we dig out from the Earth's crust. It doesn't mean that you cannot dig up aluminum as raw material. If you use aluminum as raw material and you control it at the end of the usage in a circular way or in some other way, and to make sure you do not increase the concentration level in nature, that's actually fine. It does not violate that principles. And also, number 2 is easy to understand. If you do not, it doesn't mean that you cannot produce plastic. It means you cannot systematically increase the concentration level of plastic. Well, all the other man-made objects are also in the principle. And the third one is, whatever you do, you should not systematically increase the degradation by physical means, like, overfishing or destroy habitats. And then the fourth one is, whatever you do, you should not systematically be other people's, be the barrier of other people's meeting their needs. And then we talk about what is human need. And if you think about it, and I think for example, participation is really one of the fundamental basic human needs. And that's also why engagement works so well. However, the key is we should fulfill human need and satisfy human needs. However, when we satisfy human needs, we should not violate the other 4 principles. The other 3 principles. And those are what are satisfiers. And then those are the principles. And if you find it hard to relate to what you do daily, that's fine. That's usually common comment when you first heard about it. But because the key isn't really only about the principles, it's about how do we use it. And what we say is we call it creativity within the constraint. And we just telling you what you should not do fundamentally, but there's so much still you can do, and that is the room for innovation. So in reality, what you should do, and also how do we bring system thinking into the picture, is you should not only examine what you do with the 4 principles, and you should also examine what you do in a value chain point of view. So whatever you do, you should make sure that your vision is fully aligned with sustainability principles first. And that's the future you want to go. And you are not there, and it's perfectly fine. And to me, that all the MTP needs to be aligned with the principles. And then basically we measure where we are. And we still get things measured, but we measure against how do you violate the principles. And then the room, the gap in the middle is the room of creative solutions. And it's when we prioritize the solutions is first you need to actually get on the right direction, and it needs to be flexible enough because there might be other better technology later, and there needs to be return on investment as well. So it's not until that you figure out what is the creativity part that to your full sustainability journey, then you should use the attributes to speed it up. And this is one of the examples. It's just to give you something as an example. that freedom to move in a personal, safe, and sustainable way. This can be one purpose, can be MTP, but how do you make that aligned with principles? And by the way, this way we call it backcasting. That's one of the reasons I believe AI will not fully take us to the sustainable way. These are just some examples of why we need backcasting. And those shoes are from Nike. And when we did Nike's sustainability strategy, and we challenged the designers to have to basically design the shoes fully aligned with principles. And then it turned out you don't need to lock yourself in one solution. This is team number 1, and this is fully compostable. This is fully recyclable. And then there are other people saying, what about when it's raining? Nobody's going to buy a ham shoe. And then, but anyway, this is one option they can go with. And this is team number 2. They still have shoes on petrol-based stuff, and it's fully reassembly, and it's fully from petrol. But since it's fully reassembly and also recyclable, it still doesn't violate principles. And this is team number 3. And this decided the future shoe needs to be 3D printed. And if you think about it, to have a 3D printed shoe, and which means more or less you can recycle completely, and also you eliminate so much of logistic when you produce the shoe. And so those are examples of result that you can get from backcasting from principles, because it forces you to think out of the box.
Lin, sorry.
Yeah.
We have to finish if you could.
Of course.
So I think by now I probably have finished most of the part. Yes. And this part is also exponential, but this actually shows different stages of being sustainable business. And I believe but it's not until stage number 5, integrated to strategy. And then you will push operation improvement, and you will push innovation out. And then you plug on the attributes, and you basically get you even faster to become the paradigm shifter. And I'm sorry, I didn't have time to give you more cases, but if you do want more cases or whatever, then I guess we can somehow keep in touch later. Now I cannot see anyone.
Okay, so I think it's a good time for a closing, Lin. I think we've came up with to an agreement. I don't know if you're seeing my screen.
Yeah, keep calm and start an EXO.
So I think I'm going to correct that to keep calm and start a sustainable EXO. Okay.
Yes.
So
there are people asking. I'm typing my email out. Oh, sorry. For whoever wants later contact, just drop me an email.
You have mine on screen too. And once again, thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure spending this little time with you, and hope to see you around soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
Bye.